Our program here today is going to be about your environment, how it impacts fertility, and what you can do about it. And I'm going to introduce our moderator, Nina Montee Karp, and then she's going to introduce Ken Cook from the Environmental Working Group. Nina Montee Karp is the director and producer of the award-winning educational DVDs, The Happiest Baby on the Block and The Happiest Toddler on the Block. In 2001, Nina helped create one of the first environmental documentaries, Not Under My Roof, featuring Olivia Newton-John and Kelly Preston. It was designed to teach parents how to create a healthier home. In 2010, she wrote, produced, and directed the 2 DVD set Breast Cancer, The Path of Wellness and Healing, a comprehensive guide that informs and inspires breast cancer patients and their loved ones. Nina is also a founding board member of Healthy Child, Healthy World, a national environmental nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting young children from chemical and other ambient threats and promoting safer, healthier environments. Thank you both for joining.
No?
Can you hear us? No? Better? Okay. Hello.
There.
The mic is on. Well, before I introduce you to this amazing man here, I just wanted to say, I'm sure you all know that over the past few years, we've heard more and more about our exposure to chemicals, things like solvents, pesticides, PCBs, phthalates, and a group of substances called endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, that actually mimic the body's natural hormones, and that is scary. This can be a concern to women trying to get pregnant because studies show that EDCs, for example, can cause serious reproductive effects in animals. And studies have also shown that fertility can be affected by chemicals people are exposed to at work. But what about the effects of chemicals we encounter during our everyday life in things like skincare products, perfumes that we women use every single day, cleaners, pesticides in our food, air pollution? Is there evidence that they're hurting fertility in humans as well? Well, to shed light on this concern and answer your questions on this extremely important topic, we are so fortunate to have with us today truly one of the world's top leaders on the subject of how the environment affects all aspects of our health, including fertility. And we are lucky to have President of the Environmental Working Group, Ken Cook. Let me just tell you a little bit about Ken before I give him the mic, or actually before he starts his presentation. He is the founder and president of the Environmental Working Group, one of America's top environmental advocacy groups. For 30 years, Ken has led the fight to protect our land, our waterways, and our people from environmental attack, protecting over 400 million acres of private and public farmland. Michael Pollan called Ken one of the world's 7 most powerful food advocates, along with First Lady Michelle Obama. Ken frequently champions the environment in the national media, almost daily, being featured on everything from 60 Minutes to Today's Show, and he regularly testifies before House and Senate committees and briefs top members of the Obama administration officials. Under his leadership, EWG's positions have become so influential that they are quoted in the major press, like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, hundreds of times a year. No wonder Arianna Huffington called EWG an environmental superhero. Ken lives in Northern California with his wife and young son, Cal. We're also fortunate that while we all sleep and go about our daily lives, highly effective organizations like Environmental Working Group and incredibly dedicated leaders like Ken are defending our rights every single day. I'm privileged to serve on the EWG Board of Directors, and I'm so honored to introduce to you this extraordinary man, my personal hero, Ken Cook.
Well, thank you. Well, Nina, it's a thrill to share a podium with you and share the stage with you, and thank you for all of your service to protecting the environment. So it's a thrill to be here.
It's just so little I can do, and it's so little, or actually it's our contribution daily, that we can all go on EWG website and really see what EWG is doing and what fight are they fighting on our behalf. So you founded EWG about 20 years ago. What motivated you to start?
This is our 20th anniversary this year, although it still feels like a startup to me, and it still has the energy, and everyone who works there is young except me now. So I don't know how that happened, but I think we've got data people who can probably figure that out and explain it to me. I decided to start it because we felt there was room in the public policy space for an organization that did original research and that tried to shape policy debates as well as be advocates in them. And our model was to hire the best scientists we could find, the database programmers. We have specialized a lot in doing computer-assisted investigations. And as a consequence, we were able, right from the very beginning, to start having an impact on a lot of different public policy debates involving air pollution, water pollution, agricultural subsidies. And it was really only after our first decade or so that we really started to focus, because there was so much demand for it, on how we could relate directly to consumers with the work we were doing. So that was kind of a revelation to us. We always thought of ourselves as a policy think tank, and I'm kind of glad we started to turn that corner 10 years ago. You may have noticed not a lot happens in Washington these days. And so to be able to go directly to consumers with practical ideas and advice based on our scientific research has been very rewarding for all of us. So.
I think that's great. I know you're 10 Americans. I think it'll be great and perfect for this audience. So why don't we start with
Great. Well, a good example of the research we do and how it changes public policy debates and I think consumer perceptions even is this one study we did of 10 Americans. And I want to present some of the findings that are especially relevant to this gathering. And this gathering is especially relevant to me because I had a long quest to create a family. I had a very bad thing happen 27 years ago where I lost a baby at full term with my first wife and tried for many years after that to start a family. Didn't work with her, remarried, and tried again for many years. And it was really the very last effort we made with a lot of science involved, a lot of intervention, a donor egg in our particular case, that it finally worked. And I got to that point and I knew I had reached pretty much my limit. In fact, I told my wife, who's so amazing, I actually told her that I didn't think emotionally I could keep working to have a family. And you know where I told her? In the room where we were just about ready to have the insemination happen, or the implant. That's how emotional it was for me, that right up to that moment, that was the time when I had to say, honey, I don't think I can do this. This is it. This is the last time. And it worked. So for anyone out there who's striving to start a family, however you're striving to start it, this is a very important audience, a very important gathering for me personally. So I just wanted to share that at the top. So 10 Americans is a very unusual group of people because on one day we collected blood from each of them, and we tested it at laboratories in the United States, Canada, and Europe for 413 different chemicals. We wanted to see what was in these 10 people's blood. And as it turned out, people had been studying pollution in air and water and soil for decades, but there hadn't been much study of pollution in people of the way we decided to go about it. And we found 287 toxic chemicals from just those 10 people from one sample taken in one day, an average of about 200 in each of them. 28 different waste byproducts, dioxins, furans, things that come out of tailpipes, out of incinerators, out of industrial boilers. Consumer product ingredients, Teflon chemicals, flame retardants, pesticides, all kinds of things that we encounter in everyday life. And then, to top it all off, we found 212 different industrial chemicals and pesticides and their breakdown products that had been banned 30 years before we took these blood samples and sent them to the laboratory. But they were still showing up in these 10 Americans. So who were they and how did they come to be exposed? Well, they could have been exposed from the air, but we happen to know that that wasn't the case. It wasn't from the air that they breathed. 600 million pounds of over 650 pollutants that are legally emitted into the air in this country every year. Now, that was the estimate in 2004. But we know for a fact, as I say, they weren't exposed, even though we found some of these very chemicals as a result of air that they breathed. Could have been the water that they drank. We know from evaluating, doing computer studies of water utility records all over the country that there's over 1,000 different chemical contaminants in finished drinking water. May start off looking like this, but after it goes through filtration systems, there's still lots of chemicals. But we know for a fact that, even though we found some of those too, that none of the 10 Americans were exposed as a result of the water that they drank. Could have been things that migrate out of food packaging. There are over 1,000 chemicals regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, not regulated very rigorously, that when they come into contact with food, various plastics, cardboard coatings, and so forth, migrate into food. But we know that none of them were exposed, even though we found some of these chemicals, as a result of food that they bought at the grocery store or ate at a restaurant and brought home. It wasn't personal care products that they put on their skin, makeup of various kinds, shampoo and so forth. Women use an average of about a dozen every day, exposing them to over 160 different chemicals. We found some of those chemicals, and you can go to our website, as I'll describe later, and we'll show you exactly where to look and see where they are. Men use about half that many, about 6 or so different personal care products, and they have about half the exposure. Bit of good news in this study, though. We were able to determine that most men use both toothpaste and deodorant every day. So this is not all doom and gloom here today. But they weren't exposed by virtue of using personal care products either, even though we found those chemicals. They didn't work in a place like this. They weren't farmers or farm workers, even though we found a number of pesticides in their blood. So 287 chemicals, 1 sample, each person, 10 people total. Who were they? How were they exposed? Well, the truth of the matter is we don't really know very much about them. About the only thing we know for sure is that when the exposures took place, all of them looked something like this. "70 years into the chemical revolution, no one had ever bothered to try and conduct even a snapshot, much less a survey, of how many industrial chemicals find their way into umbilical cord blood that circulates to the babies in the womb, until we did this study in 2004. So the 10 Americans I'm talking about were exposed because of what their mother was exposed to. And we found those chemicals in the umbilical cord blood. We did a subsequent study and found even more because we slightly changed the chemicals we looked for. This is what we found when we spent in 2004 and 2005 about $10,000 per sample at some of the best laboratories in the world for chemicals we thought might be there, and it turned out in most cases they were there. If we'd spent more money, or if we had the more refined techniques that we have today, how many chemicals would we have found? Well, it's really anyone's guess. Would it be 300? Would it be 800? 1,000? A lot. Here's another picture. This one's using more modern technology. It's an ultrasound. You can see this little baby near full term. He's smiling, opening his mouth, moving around as much as he can. It's pretty tight in there at this point, let me tell you. Pretty crowded. So this baby, we know, was, like most babies at this stage in his life, without the ability to filter toxic chemicals in his brain. The blood-brain barrier is yet to develop. That won't develop until he's, begin to develop until he's a newborn. We know that this baby's getting 100 or so quarts of blood circulating to his body every day that carries the oxygen he needs, the nutrition he needs, and also it's carrying the toxic chemicals that we found and many more that we probably would have found if we had bothered to look. And the other thing we know about this particular baby is this is my baby. That's Callahan Cook, getting a start. His first film. And there he is with Mom on the porch of our house, smiling in his sleep, which he still does. Here he is with his standard respectful approach to his father. And here he is at Cars Land in Anaheim. Cal was not part of the 10 umbilical cord blood samples that we studied. And I mention this because this is kind of a heavy way to talk about toxic chemicals. I realize that, and we're all exposed to them. In many cases, there's not much we can do. But there are many other cases where there's an awful lot we can do. And in particular, for anyone who's thinking about starting a family and starting it in a way that involves a pregnancy, this is a really important topic that I hope you'll pay attention to, because the environment can have a profound effect on fertility. And the profound nature of this problem is summarized by this observation, that we know that by the time babies come into the world, they've already been polluted. The mother has been exposed. But the father has also been exposed. And we're going to talk about both of those phenomena today. So why are we concerned? When we looked at those chemicals against the toxicity databases that we maintained to try and find out what their properties were, most of these chemicals were not regulated, but many of them were. Some of them, as I mentioned, were banned. We saw that about 134 had been shown to cause cancer in laboratory studies or in people. Some were known human carcinogens. 151 were implicated in animal studies and some human studies as being associated with birth defects. Hormone disruptors that Nina mentioned before, ability to fool the human body or the animal systems generally into thinking that a synthetic chemical was in fact a natural hormone causing biological effects, some serious, some not. Immune system toxicity, 130. If you're doing a little math here, you're recognizing that we're having hundreds more effects than we have chemicals. And that's simply because many of these chemicals are carcinogens, neurotoxins, immune system toxicants, and so forth. They have multiple adverse health effects. 158 neurotoxins. Oh, I'm missing one, I think. Infertility, 186. I'm sorry. It's a little slow on the draw there. Maybe it's not reading this very well. Hello? So these are mostly based, but not entirely based on animal studies. Sometimes we understand the mechanisms. Other times we mostly know that there's an association because of, in humans anyway, epidemiological studies. Now, my friends in the chemical industry, and this is one of the most important points I want you to take home, because it's easy to think that we have all these chemicals in us, and it's true, we do, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a health effect, and that is true too. Just because you find a substance in someone's blood, in their body, just because you've been exposed at an early age, does not mean you're going to experience any of the health effects we're talking about today, including infertility. But it is also true that just because the industry likes to say that these are very tiny doses that don't matter, it's also true that you need to look at that statement very carefully. It's their favorite way to dismiss concerns about toxic chemicals in our blood and in our products. But let's take a look at that argument and see if you agree with it after you see a few more slides. As my friends in the chemical industry say, a part per billion is equivalent to one pancake in a stack of pancakes 4,000 miles high. That's their own metaphor. Yeah. They actually stacked pancakes up and took this picture because they have so much money. And, but they were gracious enough to let me use it. So one pancake in a stack of pancakes 4,000 miles high, that's a part per billion. What could possibly have a biological effect at such a minuscule level? Are these doses really too low to matter? Well, let's look at some other categories of chemicals that we tend to study before they come onto the market, which is not true of the chemicals that we found in those babies for the most part. These chemicals are drugs. And so if you look at drugs that are commonly used in the United States today, you come to realize that it is possible for chemicals at the part per billion range to have some pretty profound effects. Now, albuterol is in the desk of practically every school nurse and school teacher in the country. It's used to stop asthma attacks. It's topically active, but that's a higher dose. But the dose that ends up in the blood after just one application is 2.1 parts per billion. So it's a pretty powerful chemical. Paxil is a common antidepressant. And once you've been taking it for several doses, the equilibrium level in your blood is supposed to be around 30 parts per billion. So low doses in the parts per billion range can have a difference, it seems. Cialis, 30 parts per billion, again, used to treat erectile dysfunction. And NuvaRing. I'm trying to work reproduction in here pretty heavily, as you can tell. Common birth control drug. It's effective, almost 100% effective, at 0.035 parts per billion. Not even close to a pancake in a stack of pancakes 4,000 miles high. So low doses can matter, clearly, and when we study drugs, which are designed to have these therapeutic effects, we can see that. But in addition to the therapeutic effects, which in some cases can be, most of these cases, can be pretty profound, we also have another category of effects that we worry about, because they're not called health effects in the world of pharmaceuticals and drugs. They're called side effects, not health effects. Side effects, because you take them voluntarily. So let's look at Cialis again. At 30 parts per billion, if you have any sudden decrease in hearing or vision, if you can't see or hear, stop taking Cialis and seek immediate medical help at 30 parts per billion, okay? And then there's the most notorious side effect of all. And the only question I really have about this side effect at 30 parts per billion is if you've also experienced the preceding one and can't see or hear, how do you make the call? So low doses matter. When we study them and make sure, in the case of drugs, that we understand side effects and therapeutic effects, which is required by the FDA, animal trials, and then human clinical trials, when we really thoroughly study chemicals, we find both side effects and, in the case of drugs, therapeutic effects. We don't tend to do that very much at all for most of the chemicals that we found in those babies, and hundreds and thousands more that we know are in everyday use and to which we're all exposed. So let's just review. For 30 parts per billion, you can inspire and enable human reproduction. For 0.035 parts per billion, you can prevent it. And for 30 parts per billion, you can chill out about it either way. Okay? So why are we concerned about all these chemicals in our blood, all these pollutants? Some are consumer product chemicals, some are pollutants. Well, we're concerned about them because of the occurrence of diseases that are on the rise, for which we can't properly say that evolution is at work. We're not evolving so quickly that we would see an 84% increase in acute lymphocytic leukemia in children between 1975 and 2002. That's not evolution. That's an interaction between what we bring to the party genetically and something that we're exposed to in the environment. And some people, as you saw from the Cialis example, are more sensitive than others to chemicals. And when that happens, it's a side effect in the world of drugs. When it happens with chemical pollution, it can be a health effect. And no one's volunteering to take some of these chemical pollutants as we are drugs. Hypospadias is a deformation of the penis where the urethra comes out not at the end of the penis, but somewhere along the shaft, requiring surgery, usually in infancy. It's now 1 out of every 125 boys. It's doubled in recent years. Chemicals are implicated, hormonal interactions. 57% increase in childhood brain cancer. My friend Harvey Karp will tell you he's seen a lot of kids. He's been practicing medicine for a long time as a pediatrician. If kids had brain cancer, it doesn't take long to figure that out. You know it. So this is not an artifact of better diagnosis. This is an artifact of more brain cancer. Autism now 1 in 150. Actually, it's now 1 in 111, according to the CDC. So we're approaching 1% of kids being diagnosed on the autism spectrum by the age of 3 or 4. Breast development, the onset of breasts in white girls. They're presenting in pediatricians' offices earlier and earlier every year. Every pediatrician I've talked to has noticed this. And with black girls, happening even earlier. Less data, of course, typical with the racism in the medical system and the medical studies that have been done, but there you see what's going on? Well, no one really knows what's going on, but we know we're seeing the end result of it. And almost everyone who's serious about these issues knows that, again, this is not because we're evolving so quickly or suddenly. It's because of something that's affecting some individuals who may have a genetic susceptibility and what they're exposed to in the environment. And we don't know what that is. Asthma. When I was growing up, no one I knew had asthma. Now it's about 1 in 10 kids. 1 in 10. It's not just kids, though. And here we get to some things that are pretty relevant here. We're seeing in a number of studies in both Europe and the United States, decreased sperm count, an average of about 1% per year, where chemicals are implicated. There's also reduced motility or activity of the sperm. Breast cancer, 1 woman in 8 now. Does anyone here not know, has not been touched by this horrible scourge? We know 1 in 3 women will develop cancer and 1 in 2 men will develop cancer sometime in their lifetime. And something like 7.3 or 4 million American couples, roughly 10 to 15%, the data are a little variable there, have trouble becoming pregnant or carrying to full term, impaired fecundity. And it's a 20% increase in the last 10 years. And the group that's most affected are women of childbearing age. That's where we're seeing most of the harm. So what's going on? Well, with respect to fecundity impairment, fertility, infertility. This was a statement that was issued by a whole group of reproductive health scientists, medical researchers, practitioners in 2005. They met and looked at the evidence over a period of several days and tried to figure out what will we say to the world about what we now know, the connections between the environment and just generally reproductive health might be. And so I don't like to put a lot of text up, but I thought I would just put their conclusion up. The scientific evidence we have reviewed indicates that while environmental contaminants are unlikely to be the sole causative factor underlying human infertility, some exposures cause adverse reproductive health outcomes that contribute to infertility. Some exposures. What proportion of infertility today is environmentally induced is a question of profound human, scientific, and public policy significance. And existing animal and human data suggests that a greater proportion is environmentally caused than has yet generally been realized or can be demonstrated with scientific certainty. Their feeling was that as more research unfolds, we're going to understand more and more that the environment is already playing a role in causing people to have much more difficulty getting pregnant and carrying babies to term. So what can you do? And we'll talk about this at some length. We don't want to live in isolation from exposures. Right? Now, tell me, do you want to see that slide again? Yeah, you do. Aren't you ashamed? Aren't you ashamed? Yeah, so we can't live in isolation. We live in the real world, and exposures are going to happen. And I just want to be clear, because I get this question all the time. No dogs were harmed in the making of the video. They're fine.
Nice dog.
We don't want to suggest for 1 minute that we want people to, abandon the modern world, abandon all their conveniences, abandon their lives. You don't have to, but there are things you can do to dramatically reduce your exposure to the very types of toxic chemicals that, with the best scientific knowledge we have to date, seem to pose a risk factor for infertility, both for men and for women. Both for men and for women. Here are the basic tips. Stay away from pesticide-laden foods if you can. Even if the doses are low over a lifetime, it can cause problems, and they are often shown. We do happen to test pesticides relatively thoroughly in this country, much more so than, say, the chemicals in that projector or in my computers. Eat low-mercury fish if you're pregnant or thinking of getting pregnant. Go to our website. Make sure you stay away from certain types of tuna and other fish, because mercury can cause real serious problems, nervous system problems and reproductive problems. Find out what's in your tap water. Go to our tap water database and buy a filter that cleans it up, particularly if it's trihalomethanes or disinfection byproducts.
And I'm just so sorry for all of you that are taking notes. Just go to ewg.org.
Yeah.
And you will get all this.
And we'll make this available too. We recommend people use stainless or something other than nonstick. Oop, you kind of got away from me there. My slides have a mind of their own today. Might be well, see, there you go again.
Meant to be.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's not right. I know that's not right. Okay, so let me go through these very quickly. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I think it's maybe the distance here. Teflon chemicals are showing up, Scotchgard chemicals, these perfluorinated compounds that are in so many different products, including nonstick pots and pans. They were in Post-it notes for many years. They were in the packaging. We used to buy French fries or anything at a fast food joint, and the grease never came through. Wasn't that a miracle? Well, it was a miracle of perfluorinated chemicals that repelled the grease and the water, the oil. So we recommend that people, use nonstick cookware sparingly, just because it emits all kinds of particles and can contaminate food. And then personal care products, lipsticks, makeup, shampoos, all of that. We have a website that can guide you to avoiding some of the more hazardous chemicals, even though we don't know in every case that they will cause any kind of health problem even in animal studies, just as a precaution. And you can knock down your exposures dramatically to these chemicals by just shopping a little bit smarter, using some common sense, changing some routines, the way you clean your homes and so forth, can make a big difference in the number of chemicals that you're exposed to day in and day out. Now, I did want to depart for just a minute. And here I have to use my cheat sheet on my tablet here. I want to call out a number of chemicals that particularly for this audience, I want to bring to your attention. Bisphenol A is an agent that's used in a lot of different plastics. BPA is no longer legal in sippy cups and baby bottles in California because Environmental Working Group, among others, fought to have the legislature ban it here, but it was leaching into from those containers. It's in lots of other consumer products that we'd like to see rid of that chemical because it's been implicated. BPA has been affects the oocyte, the egg chromosome, causes abnormalities, can cause has been associated in animal studies with recurrent miscarriages, and with men, decreased semen quality. So, pretty active chemical.
And Ken, if I may, before you go to the next chemical, you know when you get that slippery paper, a receipt in stores or ATM, that contains BPA, just for you to know.
Yeah, we tested it. We tested the receipts, yeah.
Then you touch.
Yeah, and it can absorb through your skin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chlorinated hydrocarbons, these are, a lot of these different chemicals, dioxins, furans that are just in the environment. DDT was a chlorinated hydrocarbon, a lot of the first generation insecticides that got banned. But they're still in all of us. They still stick around the environment. But they can cause menstrual irregularities, hormonal changes in women, reduced fertility. They've been linked to endometriosis and fetal loss, either miscarriage or spontaneous abortion. And with men, decreased sperm quality and hormonal changes. So on our website, you can see the different products that these are in. These can be in some pesticides, wood preservatives, and so forth, BPAs, and lots of different plastic resins. Disinfection byproducts, when we treat drinking water with chlorine, it forms a whole range of other chemicals that are related to fetal loss and menstrual irregularities. Ethylene oxide sterilants for anyone who's around medical equipment all the time. This is the sterilant that's used. It's associated with fetal loss, decreased semen, miscarriage in the female partner when the male's been exposed. Glycol ethers, these are in paints, varnishes, thinners, printing inks, electronics. Again, fetal loss, reduced fertility, decreased semen quality. Heavy metals, some of the same impacts that I described before for both men and women, and pesticides. Then there are phthalates and various solvents. And I guess my point is that increasingly companies are focused on transparency. They're trying to tell consumers what's in their products. We're pushing very hard across a wide range of consumer products at my organization to make sure that's the case. You can read ingredient labels, and that's a start. Sometimes you can't make much sense of them. If we have a website that can help you for personal care products or cleaning products, please, and you're inclined, please come to it. But for some of these product categories, we're not there yet. And so our advice is to people to, as best you can, do your own research for some of these other categories and really try and avoid some of these categories of chemicals that could lead to pretty serious harm. So I have two more slides. This is my little guy. Again, he was really just a few days back from the hospital. We're on the front porch of our house, and there's a thunderstorm in the distance. And he's experiencing that, right? That's the look on his face, right? It's far enough away that, it's just kind of rumbling, and there's a little light flashing. I guess he can't see the lights at that point, can he, Harvey? I don't know. He can? Who knows? He could. He could? Yeah? Yeah, that boy could. My son could, yeah. And I like to end with this is the penultimate slide, just to remind people that we all go through this process if we're trying to bring a baby into the world, trying to have a child. And I don't want anyone to be scared about it. I mean, we had a baby, and technically I was a baby, and many of you were too, I think. And while we want to reduce these exposures, we don't want to go crazy and think that we can reduce them all, or that if we don't reduce them all, something terrible is going to happen. This is a continuum, and it's a process, and we're just discovering some of these problems, just describing them scientifically now. So my hope is that eventually a thunderstorm will roll into Washington, D.C., and we'll solve some of the political problems we need to solve to improve our policies. But until then, my advice to you is, as people who are in the business of starting, building a family or starting a family, take these environmental dimensions seriously. Pay attention to them. You can make changes in your life that won't be very dramatic in terms of the quality. In fact, will improve it. And here's the thing. If you're doing something that's healthy for your family building process, it's probably going to be healthy for you as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. And thank you. Such a wonderful presentation. And you covered so much of this topic that is really important today. I just also want to share with you all that when I was making my documentary on breast cancer, that in talking to these world experts on the subject, I discovered something that I was really shocked. And that was that while in your presentation you say 1 in 8 women in this country gets diagnosed with breast cancer, only 10% of these women is genetically predisposed, which means 90% is environmental. And that was huge. So that means that we're all at risk. And as you said, everybody's here in some way. Everybody knows somebody with breast cancer or any other illnesses you mentioned. So now we know how these chemicals get into our body through little slippery papers we get in grocery stores or ATM machines, to our perfumes, cosmetics, medicine we take, air we breathe, pesticides. But I have a question, since you covered so many things that I wanted to ask about. But do these chemicals, once in our body, can you pee them out just like vitamins, or do they build inside and stay inside?
Well, it depends on the chemical. Some, like a good example is mercury. We know that if you stop eating fish that's got a lot of mercury in it after 30 to 60 days, the vast majority of the mercury you've accumulated will have been eliminated. Other chemicals that tend to be persistent and bioaccumulate, they can build up in your body and you can't get rid of them. Tragically, ironically, for this group, one of the ways to reduce the body burden of certain chemicals, if you're a woman, is to have a baby. A new study just came out that showed perfluorinated chemicals. They're intensively studying a group of people who live in proximity to the Teflon plant, DuPont's Teflon plant in Ohio, under a civil litigation agreement. They're doing medical monitoring and lots of scientific research. And they are finding that women who have a fairly high exposure through drinking water, in that case, to some of these perfluorinated chemicals, the levels in their offspring, their babies, are higher than the levels in them. So it begins to accumulate in the baby while in the womb. So it varies from substance to substance. There's probably some differences in people, too. One of the leading theories about children who are on the autism spectrum is that they have much more difficulty managing heavy metals in their bodies, and as a consequence may be accumulating heavy metals in a way that other children are not. And again, one of the unique features of, exceptional features, interesting features of the autism spectrum is that 60% of the kids on that spectrum are boys. So something's going on there that has to do with the environment and the constitution of little boys the makeup of little boys, and the makeup of certain little boys in the population, now about 1 in 111.
How about, are most chemicals safety tested before they're allowed to be on the market?
You know, they're not, unfortunately. Pesticides, as I mentioned, they are required to go through something like 120 health and safety studies before they're allowed on the market, but they're designed to kill pests, kill weeds, kill insects, fungus, rodents, what have you, for agricultural and other purposes. Drugs are tested rigorously, another category of chemicals. Again, we make mistakes in both, right? You read periodically that a pesticide that's been used on agricultural products for decades is suddenly being taken off the market by EPA because it's been found to be unsafe. Well, it was unsafe 20 years ago. We just didn't know it. In the case of drugs, you also read periodically, right, about a drug that suddenly has to come off the market, or its dosage has to be changed, or some other shift has to be made in the therapeutic use of it if it's not entirely banned, because we find out that the side effects we thought affected only a small group of people and were acceptable, presumably, are not. And that lots of people are being harmed by drugs taken in the regular therapeutic manner. So then there's the vast majority of industrial chemicals that aren't well tested at all. There's no pre-market testing requirement for any of the chemicals that go in personal care products. There's no pre-market testing of the products themselves in the complex formulations that they are. Same is true of cleaners. And so as a result, almost any chemical can be put into either of those products. The government does not stand behind either of them with respect to the kind of chemical testing we do for pesticides and drugs. There are about 80,000 chemicals in the inventory of industrial chemicals in this country, and we add hundreds and hundreds to that inventory every year. And most of them are approved by the Environmental Protection Agency in a matter of weeks. Manufacturers can submit health and safety studies, but there's no protocol, there's no set of studies that have to be conducted or conducted in a certain way in order to get approval. So we really have a lot of exposures happening, Nina, where we don't have very good testing. We don't have a very good idea of what we're being exposed to. And even with drugs, something like 15% of the top 200 drugs by sales volume in this country have significant side effects at doses below 100 parts per billion. So low doses can matter. Lots of chemicals out there. We're kind of in a bit of a chemical stew. We don't really even have a full map of the human toxome like we're developing of the human genome. We don't really know for the population. We have a lot of unknowns about what chemicals we're all exposed to.
Talking about testing, if you have fertility difficulties, is there any way to know if it came from chemical exposures? And can you test the blood or hair for unwanted chemicals?
You can test for chemicals. It's pretty expensive and pretty hard to manage. The most important thing, I'm not a medical doctor, so the most important thing I think for those of you who are concerned about these issues, and we were concerned in my family enough to look into them, and of course I had a staff of scientists who were helpful, and we've tried to put some of that information to work on our website at ewg.org. The first thing I think you want to be able to do is go to a place like UCSF, where they have a wonderful clinic that worries about the reproductive impacts of environmental exposures. They have a whole series of brochures and guides that can help you think through simple questions like, was I exposed when I was young to certain chemicals? Do I have an occupation that exposes me to certain chemicals? The reason for asking that question up front is because those are the studies that we tend to have completed or done the most to understand the effects of chemicals on reproduction. They tend to be pretty high-level industrial exposures, workplace exposures. After that, the evidence gets really much, much tougher to interpret. And so that's why our take at Environmental Working Group is, first we want disclosure. We want to know what chemicals we're being exposed to. We want studies of the population to see what the exposure patterns might be in our bodies. And then we want to take practical steps to avoid exposures by smarter shopping, changes in our behavior, the kinds of paints and varnishes you use, the personal care products, the food you eat, the water you drink, to really knock down those exposures. And you can knock them down very dramatically and still live in the modern world.
It is so true, and in my own circle, and I know a lot of people here, a few girlfriends became pregnant after years of struggling by reducing their exposure, eating organic whenever possible, avoiding tuna fish and swordfish, really being mindful of cosmetics they use, and you can see that on the website. Now we would like to open this to your questions.
Oh, and I should also say, just before I go on, I mean, I always tend to gloss over it, and I shouldn't. You know, cigarette smoke is a pretty known risk factor for fertility issues, for reproductive health, alcohol. You know, these are things that most medical doctors will advise you about as you're going about trying to get pregnant.
Okay, first question.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Cook, thank you. There's this rumor, I don't know if it's true, that drinking soy milk for men is bad for reproduction. Is that true?
Soy milk? You know, I'm not up on that science, I have to admit. I have heard some of the same concerns about soy milk, but I just don't have that information. We're taking a close look at food now at Environmental Working Group beyond the chemicals that contaminate food. So far that's been our focus, but we haven't looked at those particular factors.
I have 2 questions. Oh, here.
I can't. Oh, there you are.
Totally different. But one was, I know there's been this huge, I don't know, bandwagon of people cooking with like olive oil, which I know has a low burning point and emits carcinogens. And so one, I was thinking of as far as people that are joining this whole group of people cooking with a lot of oils and maybe not doing it properly. And then my other thought was around the toxic levels that may go into vaccinations. And because I'm a doula and I see a lot of my clients getting pressured while they are carrying to get the flu vaccine and maybe the DTaP vaccine. And then the day after the baby is born, they're asking if they want to give the baby the flu vaccine, and they're pushing the hepatitis B vaccine one day after birth. And I know a lot of these carry, formaldehyde and other toxic chemicals that are out there, and some people just don't know about the ingredients. So just a thought process around that.
Well, I'm not familiar with, I know that anytime sort of any cooking process is going to release certain chemicals that, the best advice is to try and do it under a hood, try and ventilate. I think most of that exposure that might take place could be eliminated or dramatically reduced if you had a vent on. And so don't forget to do that. Don't forget to turn that on if you have one. If you don't have one, I guess I would be, just
opening a window.
Yeah, Harvey.
Well, just one thought about that is to use canola oil, because canola oil is also a monounsaturated fat like olive oil, but has a much higher burn point, so
Yeah.
that you
And
can
coconut
use
oil.
a higher heat, and then save the olive oil for putting it on salads and not eating
And coconut oil.
Yeah.
coconut oil.
And as
I don't know a lot about grapeseed oil.
I don't know yeah. And as for vaccines, this is a very sensitive question. We have not made a study of vaccines beyond initially. We were concerned early on that as the vaccination regime became more intense in the 80s and early 90s, not enough attention was given to one particular ingredient that was going into vaccines as a preservative, which was mercury. Most pediatric vaccines in this country, I think, no longer have mercury in them. Those were mostly the multi-shot vials, I think, that were being used, and without anyone admitting that there was ever a problem, the practice has changed, or at least a lot of people in the medical profession. From my standpoint, we face these same things, and my wife and I have, it's a serious question. I mean, we have spaced out the vaccinations, and our medical doctors, our pediatricians have been very thoughtful about that. They've been very careful to make sure that we felt comfortable going at a slower pace, not having so many vaccinations at once. Our little guy's, I think, thoroughly protected now, but we didn't follow the regime that might have been in place, say, 10 years ago. But I think some people are avoiding vaccines now, and it's very worrisome that we are seeing the incidences of some disease, some pockets of disease that could have been prevented by vaccination. So the risk is, there's a risk with vaccination. There's a known risk in many cases without it. So I'll go back to my pediatrician. Yeah. I bring a pediatrician, this particular pediatrician, to most of my talk. The lawyer left, so yeah.
Just one tidbit of advice is that, as you had mentioned, that when you get the flu vaccine, there are multiple dose vials and single dose vials. So you get 5 doses in one vial or 1 dose in the other vial. And when it's a multiple dose vial, that has mercury in it as a preservative, because they're sticking a needle in, then a few days later they're putting another needle in to take another dose, and the concern is that if they put in some type of bacteria accidentally, then it has several days to start living and creating a problem. So what you want to do is ask for single dose vials when you're pregnant, or for your children for that matter, not to get influenza from multi-dose vials.
Yeah.
We're right in the middle of the worst pertussis outbreak in the last 60 years, and it's one of the good reasons for getting whooping cough vaccines, even starting at a very, very early age. We start at 2 months of age usually with babies. So it's important not to look at immunizations overall one way or the other, and to really, it's not a parent's responsibility to become a biochemist, I mean, that's where you rely on doctors.
And government.
But to pick a doctor that you feel listens to you and has the time to consult with you to carefully explain why they want to do this at this time and what the rationale is.
And because the government is not doing enough to protect us, that's why we empower organizations like Environmental Working Group to actually represent us and make changes on legislative level, and that's really important. Okay, more questions.
Okay, I think,
Hi.
first of all, hello. I would like to thank you, first and foremost, for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you.
And
You're very kind.
I dedicated my whole summer cleaning my house completely. The parabens, got rid of all that. It was mandatory. Yeah, I have 2 little nephews, a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old, so it's necessary. The boys change things here and there. Okay, but as far as, very simple, I know you have an app that you've created. It's the Veggie app where you could look at
Shopper's Guide to Pesticides, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But will you be creating one for just products?
We are. We will have apps for all of our personal care products. We've reviewed, I think, almost 80,000 personal care products, and over 8,000 ingredients, I think. We've also reviewed something like 2,200 cleaning products. We'll be expanding that dramatically with over 1,000 ingredients. Those will be apps within a year. And then we're going to take on some of these food questions that came up today, and others beyond. So we will. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very helpful. If you don't have it, get it.
And the Shopper's Guide to Pesticides and Produce is we take a look at government data, and we always tell people that if you can find organic and afford organic, it's a good bet. It's good for the environment, good for you, reduces the pesticides. But my friend Phil Landrigan likes to say that some people think of organic as private school for food. And
I like that.
It can be, at point of purchase, a little expensive. If you look at your overall food budget, you can, and you look at the food waste and how much you eat out, you can usually find the money to eat all organic. But let's say you can't, and you still are worried about the pesticides. The Shopper's Guide uses USDA and FDA data, and we look to see which conventionally grown foods tend to be low in pesticides because of the types of pesticides used and when and how they're sprayed on the crops. And it turns out there are lots of fruits and vegetables that have very low levels of pesticides, and you don't necessarily have to buy those organic.
And I have to say something too, also again, while I was making a movie, that I interviewed also women who had stage 3 and 4 cancer and metastatic cancer, yet they were alive and thriving. And most of these women looked at that food as their pharmacy. You know, one of the women said to me, look at this little Ambien. We all use it if you go to Europe and you cannot sleep. Look what this little tiny pill can do to you. So imagine on a daily basis if you eat, you know, all the French fries and burgers and deep fried, what it can do to you. And it's really a simple philosophy that to look at everything we eat with different eyes, that it is giving us power and vitamins. When you look at that as your food is empowering you to be healthier and better in your life, then it doesn't look like, I mean, you really want to eat the best quality organic food if possible. Okay, one more question, please.
I have a question. I have always found it ironic that when you're trying to build a family, you're eating what you think is the best, you're drinking, you know, you're following all the rules 110%, and then 1 month before you're going to do, if someone's going to do IVF, you have to shove all this medication into your system. And for people that have done it multiple times or throughout many years, I always wonder, and I've read studies, and there's never been any study that has told me that this is the conclusion. It does impact down the line. Everything is inconclusive, and it's very unsettling. I'm sure for anyone that all the injections that you're taking, all the medications you're asked to take, and within that condensed period of time, you don't know years from now what that's going to do, not only to you, but to the child that you're working so hard to bring.
Hoping to bring into
and
the
it's
world.
just such an ironic.
It helps you bring that child to the world.
I'm wondering what thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, you know, this revolution is not so very old at this point of the fertility revolution. I'm a beneficiary of it, right? Our little guy was had a lot of science going for him that that enabled us to bring him into the world, and we were trying to make sense of what work had been done to understand the health effects, if any, of all of those exposures that my wife had, and what effects they might be having. And we kind of came to the conclusion that you did, that at this stage they've been able to rule out some adverse effects, but the studies are still underway, and the vast majority of kids who have been brought into the world through those techniques have been brought into the world in the past 20 years. So if there's any latency period in the health effects, any subtle chronic health effects, unless they showed up in animal studies at high doses and there was extrapolation, we don't see the human component of it yet, quite. I don't know, Harvey, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the way I think of it is
and this is Dr. Harvey Karp, by the way, the happiest baby on the block, so, and also a board member, and also happens to be Nina's husband. So there we go. I'll just, yeah.
I mean, the payoff is so huge, and what's your alternative? What's your choice? So I kind of think of it the same way we were talking about vaccines maybe before. These things have a real health payoff for you, a real ultimate goal. So try to avoid the slippery receipts and the pesticides on your food and the home care products and the cleaning products, so you decrease your exposure in the ways that you have some control over. The beauty of the body is that we're all exposed to lots and lots of chemicals, but if you keep your body healthy, you're able to not succumb to those effects. And so, in general, as best you can. And so I think it's always a balance, and it's a concern. I wouldn't underestimate that. But you can try to, kind of lessen that concern by the things that you do have some control over.
And I think that is exactly why some of these women that we met in the last 2 decades who actually had success, you try to reduce the toxic burden, And also, like what you talk about, and I learned from you, skin being the largest organ of our body, what do you put on your skin as like body lotion? And like things like what kind of water do you drink and stuff like that. So all that, that's why I think a lot of women that had success did, you know, what you're going through, but then also reduce their exposure at home, in the environment, and try to be mindful of these things.
I just want to make a comment about organic food, about that private school for food comment, because I kind of look at it a different way. When I talk to my patients about it, it's really more about building the infrastructure of the country. It's more like building roads. Right now, most of us really benefit from the investments that our parents or grandparents made. The interstate highways, you don't pay much for that. The airports, the schools, the post offices, those have been built by the people who came before you. What are we building for the next generation? And a survey, thank you. A survey was done several years ago asking individuals if it costs the same amount of money for food sprayed with chemicals that kill insects, after all, or food that's not sprayed with chemicals, but it's not going to cost you any more money. Do you have a preference? Is there one that you'd rather get compared to the other one? Well, it's obvious you'd rather get the one that doesn't have chemicals on it. So,
We're starting the revolution.
On to organic. It's Les Mis. Everyone break out into it. So anyway, ignoring that, the idea is that 20 years from now, you'd love a world to exist where your child doesn't have to make the same decision you have to make. And so to the degree that you can, that it's not overly expensive, you know, to start buying organic foods. That's what builds the industry. You vote with your dollars, and then your child is going to have a much easier time when he or she's raising his family.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karp.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ken, so much.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry you guys have to leave like this.
Best of luck.
Thank you for this noble mission and your work and helping people like our audience today.
It's urgent.
Yes.
I can tell.
And everybody, if you want to support the work of EWG, please go to the website, and we're certainly open for contributions, because the chemical companies have hundreds of lobbyists for everyone that's defending your rights. And so that type of support helps while you're going about your daily business and sleeping at night. Ken Cook and EWG is hard at work defending your rights.
That is so true. Thank you.
I want
And
board
thank
members
you,
like
thank
you.
you, Ustream. Thank you for coming. Good luck with your everything that you do, and hopefully it will be successful. And we have to thank Ustream for the live stream of this session. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.